You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 19th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio.
NATO's members wonder if they'll emerge from next week's summit on the same side. Could US President Donald Trump really sell his isolationist supporters on another Middle Eastern military adventure? And Monocle reveals the winners in its annual Quality of Life survey. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from Studio 4 here at Dufferstrasse 90 in Zurich. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Gorana, Grgić and Gabe Bullard will discuss the day's big stories, and our weekly letter from is a letter from elsewhere in Switzerland. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. It's the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I'm joined today here in our Zurich studio by Gorana Grgić, Monocle's security correspondent, and by Gabe Bullard, journalist based in Basel. Gabe, you're newest to the Daily, and I think newest to our listeners, although listeners to Monocle on Sunday may have heard from you once or twice. So introduce yourself to the Daily audience, if you would.
Yes, I'm a journalist based in Basel, as you said, covering a little bit of everything with a large focus on culture and technology as well, and have been a little silent over the last few months as I finish up a manuscript for a book project.
Oh, go ahead and plug it. You can if you like.
Against Convenience is the title, so coming out next fall.
Is this a non-fiction work campaigning in favour of everything, making everything more difficult and annoying, or a novel?
It's nonfiction, a little bit more friction, but hopefully a lot less annoyance at fewer sort of automated bits and bobs when you're in the stores and things.
Okay, well, we will have you back on to talk about that in due course when it is available, presumably in paper-only shops. Gorana, you're a more familiar voice to our listeners. What have you been working on recently?
Well, I also do have a book manuscript coming up.
Oh, go on then.
But it's co-authored and it's an academic book on Europe's Indo-Pacific pivot. That's what it's called. So basically looking at the increasing European footprint, especially in terms of security and defense cooperation with various Indo-Pacific partners, whether they're countries or organizations, and it's a little bit of a play on what was supposed to be U.S. pivot to Asia-Pacific once upon a time under Obama administration, but then now we are sort of seeing this sort of idea of the Indo-Pacific being open and free and so on. So that's coming up with a colleague from the University of Madrid. Actually, we've just approved our cover page, which is a very generic sort of looking Palgrave Macmillan type of thing. I'm sure it's going to be a great summer read one of these summers. So, I'll keep you posted.
And does anybody else have anything else they want to sell? Some unused skis, a second-hand fridge?
I've got a promo code I can drop a little bit later.
Yeah.
Well, we will start by squinting ahead to next week's NATO summit in The Hague, which, for reasons pertaining to the present scheme of things, is likely to be an unusually lively one. The alliance's European members will doubtless strive to keep attention focused on Ukraine, while the alliance's most powerful member, the United States, which was already preoccupied with China, is now further distracted by the Middle East, and that is all before one starts factoring in the current US administration's enthusiasm for the idea of NATO at all. Gorana, first of all, how lively do we expect this to be? If we think of the Munich Security Conference in February as a recent low point of the transatlantic alliance, would we say it has rebounded at all since then?
I mean, rebounding from a very, very low point is a super low bar then, and you then can say, it has maybe rebounded a little, probably mostly due to the unyielding efforts by the NATO's relatively newish SecGen Mark Rutte, who is actually going to be hosting this summit for the first time as the SecGen, and he's doing it also in the Netherlands. So the summit is taking place in Den Haag next Tuesday and Wednesday. But then in terms of where we are, in the kind of state of transatlantic alliance, I mean, I always refer to this quote by the late historian of transatlanticism, Stanley Hoffman, who said, that the history of Atlantic Alliance is a history of crisis. But I would say that this time around, it feels distinctly different, right? The fact that Donald Trump has said and done a lot of things that has undermined just the kind of cohesion of the alliance on so many levels, that this really now feels like, if this is not the wake-up call for NATO Europe to kind of stand up and get its act together, I don't know what else would need to happen for that to actually materialize. And indeed, I think what I'll be watching for, given that we are all now, all us NATO nerds at least, looking at the summit with great trepidation, whether Donald Trump actually pulls out earlier, whether, there are some last minute kind of negotiations over what was previously agreed on these new defense target capabilities and so on. So there's been now a lot of speculation on some of these things that were at least in Mark Rutte's sort of mind, already settled. But I think not everything is necessarily, or at least for now, going according to those plans. So Spain saying it might actually block the communique on the part that there is a 5% spending, or indeed, if really this sort of clamoring of US potentially launching strikes against Iran, right, whether this completely derails the summit and what implications it might have for Europeans as well.
Couple of things there we will come back to, but Gabe, I think Gorana highlights the key point which will set the tone for how this summit goes, which is the degree to which Europe has woken up, because the principal source of the Trump administration's animus, this Trump administration and the previous one, was this idea about which they were not wrong, that Europe has taken a decades-long nap beneath the security umbrella furnished by the United States. In terms of the numbers we are starting to see from some countries, we'll have 23 of 32 members at 2% at least of GDP by this year. Is that going to shut Trump up, do we think?
I don't think so. I think that expecting a predictable response from the president is going to be maybe not a game to get into necessarily, but no, I think that it's going to constantly be moving goalposts. I think that we see that with any of the president's international negotiations and even domestic negotiations, that there's always going to be a new shifting goal. Maybe they'll make some efforts, but we could get two different responses within the same hour at this point.
Gorana, how hard is Europe going to find it to keep the United States focused on Ukraine? Trump obviously has been equivocal, to put it charitably, on Ukraine, both before returning to office and since. When I say Ukraine's at a crunch point now, it's obviously been at one for a little over 3 years. But this coming summer is obviously extremely important. Another blunted Russian offensive would be a key moment.
You're absolutely right about that, and you are extremely charitable when you say that there is this sort of maybe kind of equidistance being practiced by the U.S. administration towards Ukraine and Russia. I mean, we've seen basically a U-turn when it comes to a lot of things that the U.S. has been doing under the Biden administration when it comes to supporting Ukraine and sort of sanctioning Russia. These days, Donald Trump is in a lot of ways, I think in more cases than not, kind of seeing more sort of Putin side of thing and being more empathetic. I think just last week, we actually heard him talk about how he explains that Putin invaded or reinvaded Ukraine as a result of Russia being booted off of G8. So anyway, coming back to your question on Europe and kind of filling the gap. You see, actually, there has been this concerted effort to try to keep the Americans engaged, at least in this short to medium run, because we know that European defense still depends on a lot of American critical enablers. Of course, first of all, we always talk about the nuclear deterrence, which we can't go past, but there are so many other things, actually, that goes just in the field of conventional deterrence and defense, and also just things like logistical support, intelligence sharing, that actually you can't do without the Americans, right? So think about satellites, think about intelligence, think about guidance for some of these, for instance, Germans have Taurus missiles, but they are nothing without American guidance systems, right? They can't project as deeply unless they have that sort of support. So also in terms of intelligence sharing, this is largely something that happens either with the support of the United States or through the sort of Five Eyes arrangements and so on. So I think what was very interesting in the past couple of weeks and months actually was this concerted effort to try to decouple the trade spat with the sort of push to keep the alliance cohesive, right? And here we can't overstate how much the EU and NATO have cooperated and how much they are talking to say maybe now is not the right time to be as antagonistic, right? To just keep Trump a little bit in. But again, this is all, and maybe referring back to this sort of idea that, you know, what does this mean for Trump? He constantly keeps on moving these goalposts, and that's absolutely right. But for now, they just have to sort of give something, right? Deliver something. And this is where the genesis of this whole 3.5 on hard defense target and 1.5 on anything that's defense related comes from, because he's been obsessed with the 5% figure, right? And we have to look at his foreign policy through the prism of domestic politics, where he can go back to his base, right? And say, look, I made these Europeans spend more, right? They're spending 5%. And if anything, you know, we saw this couple of weeks back at the Shangri-La dialogue when Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, went and said to the Asian allies, look, even Germany is now committing to this. And how about you guys? You have an even bigger threat in China, and you are all sort of struggling to get around 2%. So several layers there.
Gabe, just finally on this one, and to return to that theme of shifting goalposts, do you detect still an amount among Europe of wishful thinking that if they chase, I'm going to extend this metaphor possibly beyond endurance, but if they chase these goalposts around long enough, eventually they will catch them? Because there is still wishful thinking underpinning this, that we can figure out a way to please the United States, to keep Donald Trump in NATO, whereas more hard-headed voices in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe that I've spoken to in the last 6 months in particular, have said we have to at least act as if the United States is about to leave us to it.
I think there is, and maybe the hope is diminishing over time, but I think there might still be a thought out there that someone is going to figure out the appropriate formula for pleasing the White House on this. And when they do, they will be in a good position. I think we've seen, not necessarily with NATO, but just with other times, these other world leaders visiting the White House, saying the right things and everything. There's a lot of strategy that can go into that, where it seems like people are thinking, you know, how do I get on the president's good terms? So whether we can see that as a group effort and whether that will prevail, I'm not sure.
Well, moving along somewhat, by the time NATO convenes on Tuesday, we may have some idea what President Trump has decided where Iran is concerned. US media has reported today that Trump has signed off on attack plans, but Trump himself is heavily telegraphing that he has not yet made up his mind. One factor doubtless complicating his deliberations is that in all three of his presidential election campaigns, he has gone hard on the folly of American involvement in Middle Eastern wars and pronounced himself far too clever to get sucked into any such schmozzle. It is an open question as to whether his cult would follow an about turn on this issue as blindly as they usually do on others. Gabe, there's a few things there we need to get into, but first of all, if we detach the scenario from, and if only we could detach the scenario from the people who are making decisions about it, is there at this point just a brutally utilitarian argument in favour of American involvement? And I guess what I'm saying is America strikes a decisive blow, demolishes whatever remains of Iran's nuclear capacity, and Iran sort of grudgingly agrees to call it a draw, and it's all over.
I mean, that's getting into the heart of the matter that I think some of the more hawkish members of the Senate, especially some of that old guard, are really pushing for, where they say, you know, what is the point in trying to negotiate at this point after abandoning the last deal if this could be done through military strike? So I think the more interventionist wing of the party, this is kind of what they're getting at, is seeing it potentially even as a quick solution, though I wouldn't think that yet another American military involvement in the Middle East is boding to be any sort of a quick solution to anything.
Is the calculation this time, Gorana, though, different? Because not even the sharpest beaked hawk is talking about actually invading Iran. The option, as we have so far been led to understand it, is this would be a US air campaign in association with Israel's air campaign.
Well, certainly, I think what is a bit different, I think, to maybe the previous clamoring of a lot of Iran hawks was, the kind of John Boltonite type of argument to stop Iran from having a bomb Iran, right? That was the name of that famous essay back in Foreign Affairs some decade or so ago. And I think that back then there was actually a stream of GOP that was very hawkish, neoconservative, right, that sought regime change in Iran, and that saw basically no way to negotiate, right? And I actually remember very vividly the lead up to the JCPOA negotiations where Tom Cotton and the like, the kind of senators in that camp were saying to President Obama, what you're doing is essentially unconstitutional. You're making this executive agreement and you don't even know American Constitution. You can't enter any sort of treaties, etc. Leaving aside, the kind of executive power that presidents actually enjoy and so on. But they were making this bigger point about sort of Senate needing to check what's going on. I would now just, because I started in this note, and there's a reason that I've started in this note, and that is that the U.S. Constitution under Article 1 says that it is the Congress that actually has the war-making powers.
Indeed, right? So, but no one's really paid much attention to that for some time.
And we've had now, we are coming off the heels of a great military parade and also the split screen, the No Kings protest. And it just tells you something about the extent to which now we've seen basically submission of the legislative branch to the executive branch. This didn't start under Trump, but now it's on steroids, right? And I think maybe if we look at it through that context, the lack of any kind of challenge, or if there is challenge, it's coming from the likes of Tucker Carlson, who is, a kind of defamed Fox News host, right? So in that sense, there is no serious discussion within that sort of part of the political spectrum over the merits of doing something along these lines. And again, it's not now at all coming from the U.S. side. This would be basically to support essentially Benjamin Netanyahu in what he has started.
I mean, it is interesting, Gabe, that there are some Trump-adjacent voices which have taken a fairly firm line against getting involved in this. Tucker Carlson, to whose roughing up of Senator Ted Cruz, I think Gorana was alluding there, but also Steve Bannon, whose current relationship with Trump is open to conjecture, but he said today that US involvement would, quote, tear America apart. And I say that with the usual caveats about the wisdom of paying any attention to Steve Bannon about anything. But YouGov polling, I think, in the last 24 to 48 hours has suggested that only 19% of Americans actually actively favour getting into this. All that considered, if Trump decided for whatever reason that he did want to get into this, could he actually sell this to his cult after for more than a decade campaigning on no more stupid wars, we don't want to get sucked into the Middle East, it's a mess? Could he really sell this now to MAGA world?
Part of me says yes. However, I think some of, and again, all caveats necessary in referencing Steve Bannon or even Tucker Carlson at this point, but where they're talking about this could be the end of the Trump presidency, essentially delegitimizing him with his base. There's something to there because that does seem like one of the more dire warnings. And the president going for this military involvement for an attack on Iran would be perhaps the most significant or the largest of the backtracks from the ways that he campaigned, and one of his most consistent messages. That said, I think he can sell it. I think there have been so many small changes, medium-sized changes, so many things that have been done against public polling, so many things that have been done where Congress could intervene and doesn't, that essentially whether the president thinks he can actually test how far his free reign goes, I'm not sure. But whether he actually will, and whether his actual base of supporters, that group of several million people in the United States, that roughly third or so of the country who really, really support him, will go along with it, I think so. If we're talking electoral politics, down the road in the next U.S. election or something like that, I think the president has already lost a lot of the supporters who he gained in the last election. A lot of these people who were maybe on that edge case. They're not the MAGA diehards. They don't wear the red hat every day if they wear it or have it at all. I think that what we've already seen with the immigration enforcement in the U.S. and the uncertainty over tariffs and everything like that, I think a lot of those people, we see those stories where they're starting to regret their vote. I think that side is probably already lost, and I don't know how much that's actually going. Any sort of backtracking on Iran and launching attacks is going to necessarily win back people who he had won over and then lost recently.
Gorana, just finally on this, and as tersely as possible, is the current situation, do you think, still retrievable short of getting any worse than it already is? Have we passed any point of no return? It is being reported within the last hour that there actually has been telephone contact between Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister. They've spoken to each other a few times in recent days. Araghchi is himself due in Geneva tomorrow to speak to a bunch of European foreign ministers, and that's only the contacts we know about. I'm sure there's been a great deal more going on. Do you I guess glean is the word I want, anything from those dynamics? Is Iran trying to find a way out of this? Does Israel think like it's made its point, or does this have more to play out?
Well, I wish I knew a sort of very brief and sort of pointy answer. I would say, if we were to compare it to October of last year, right, when those missiles were exchanged and when things started to look dire between Iran and Israel, there was a way to find an off-ramp, but we also had a different president in the White House. Having said that, I do think that in some of what Trump has said, and now we are also, with caveats to what Donald Trump says, because he says a lot, he did say that Iran does have a choice, and that is to basically abandon its nuclear program. But in even saying that, right, he's not determining, he has made a decision, right? There is a little bit of a rhetorical off-ramp, or at least I want to sane wash it in that way. And there certainly is what you alluded to, and I think that still matters. A lot of this sort of back-channel diplomacy and even stuff that is very much now being publicized, and that is the meeting that you referred, E3 Plus and Iran, trying to really resuscitate some of the efforts really by Europeans who desperately want to save some sort of diplomacy, who do want to de-escalate, who felt betrayed by 2018 U.S. withdrawal from JCPOA. So in that sense, it is not preset, but again, I wouldn't. The kind of trajectory we are on now is quite unlike of what we had just some 8 months ago, and it is more scary. And I think the fact that there is the other element, which is Bibi Netanyahu's political survival as well, we can't discount that, from the broader equation. This is not just about, what U.S. wishes are and so on. This has to do also with some domestic politics in the region. It also has to do with, frankly, the fact that even if, various regional states are saying we want to de-escalate, some are quietly actually rejoicing at seeing Iran being attacked, right? And this is, for some of them, maybe a window of opportunity to see what was maybe unimaginable just a couple of years ago. So I might leave it there, but a lot of tea leaves to be read.
Well, indeed. Now to something completely different, i.e. the latest headache posed by ChatGPT and similar large language models, those generative AI platforms which, despite being hopelessly unreliable, glorified speak-your-weight machines, have been seized upon by indolent students, lazy hacks and opportunist authors as a means of avoiding work. So prevalent has this become, however, that authors are now having to combat the assumption that they have outsourced their writing to AI, some posting live streams and time-lapses of themselves tapping diligently away to prove that all their words were extracted one at a time from their own heads. Monocle Radio listeners are just going to have to take my word for it. Gabe, and you can, in this answer, use the formulation, well, as I was writing my own upcoming book, insert title here. But is there any point in writers going to these lengths to prove that they actually wrote the damn book? At some point, are we not just going to have to ask readers to trust us?
Right. I think that's there are the two questions here. One is, what would be effective for an author to do? Because, okay, so you post a live stream of yourself writing. Someone is going to challenge it. Someone, acting in bad faith is going to say, how do I know this itself was not?
I mean, the realistic live stream from an author to post would be video of them slowly tapping out 37 publishable words and then spending the whole day really cleaning the kitchen.
Exactly,
that would be a more accurate reflection of the writer's life.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this is driven by this public skepticism that authors are doing it, or this perception, I think, on the part of authors of public skepticism. At the risk of sounding a little bit cynical here, I don't know how much the average person really thinks about it or cares too much. And that's the sort of other big part of this question, is that I think when you see the way that certain people who are outside of a field, a creative field, talk about their hopes for generative artificial intelligence, especially, you see something where there's not really a strong understanding of what the creative process is, of, that excellent part of the process that comes from cleaning the kitchen that gives you these great ideas and everything. And I think
that's what you're telling yourself while you're cleaning the kitchen.
Exactly. Yes. And this idea that I think that a lot of people just don't really understand what it takes to write a book, to publish a book, to even write something as simple as a news article. And so I think that, that's maybe some authors are concerned, and rightfully so, but I think attempting to prove it is just kind of fighting the wrong sort of battle to try to show that you're not using AI. What I'm also concerned about, though, is the people in editorial fields who are embracing it and saying, no, I am going to use it. I am going to use it to generate ideas. And seeing that getting a warm welcome, I think, is maybe the more ominous sign.
What do you think about that, Gorana? Is there going to be a case for it? Because I have my own interactions with ChatGPT more or less stopped when I decided to give it a try, because I'm a curious sort of fellow, to see if it actually was any use as a research tool. So I queued it up with a few things pertaining to things I was researching. It earnestly informed me that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who was overthrown several months ago, was still the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and then told me that President John F. Kennedy had been President of the United States during most of the early 1970s, at which point I thought, okay, I might be done here. I mean, I think we have to recognize, though, that these machines are at a relatively early stage and will doubtless improve. But even if they do improve beyond making elementary mistakes and just inventing loads of stuff, which is a problem as well, is there ever going to be a case for actual writers to actually use them?
This is a really hard one for me, because I mean, I can see sort of different sides to this whole problem, which is quite wicked, and which actually makes me think how far we've come so fast, because it was only 2 or 3 years ago when I can just share very briefly at the University of Sydney, where I was teaching at the time, we had this sort of steering group committee, something, the academic jargon for bureaucracy. Anyway, where we were talking about AI increasingly being used or at some point in the future, and this was end of 22, I believe, or something along those lines, and we were saying maybe in 10 years' time, when some sort of AI comes and starts helping students write their essays, and lo and behold, it happened within 3 months of us having this, that sort of tells you the power of foresight at the time. But what I see happening, and I can speak best for the sort of sector that I am in, so higher education, what's happening at the universities, I see a lot more of the embrace rather than a pushback. I see... But
is it being embraced as an actual helpful creative adjunct, or is it being embraced by people who just don't want to do any work?
Actually, a lot of now, sort of, it depends. Of course, it's an institutional decision, but I see a lot of universities are actually including now generative AI in some way to basically act as either devil's advocate or a stunt double for instructors and so on. They make kind of scaffolded assessments where they say, you can't just come to, ChatGPT and ask him to produce a particular, essay or something, that you just prompt with a couple of sentences, but you actually need to think about assessments now more creatively. And that's true because these days it is so convenient. So to go back to your book title, again, a plug, and now followed by a special code. But it is so convenient, and there is a bigger problem of us needing to rethink education. And again, I can speak only from this part where it is hard to get students these days to really engage. I mean, we can wax lyrically about, how important it is to read books. And
a story I'm sure you've seen today that some French universities are going to mandate handwritten note-taking in lectures instead of allowing people to bring in laptops. And there's other universities are saying, we're just going to have to go back to written essay exams. Exactly. Everyone in a hall for 3 hours with a blank piece of paper.
That's exactly where I ended up resorting. But you also can't do everything in an exam form, especially if you want to make people, develop particular research skills that still involve engaging. You can't keep people in a closed room without access to internet or whatever, access to AI, right, for 24 hours or 48 hours, which I think would be like a cumulative time that it takes to actually produce something of value. So it is a hard one, really, and I don't have a straightforward answer. I think that these days we are just figuring out so many of these things that maybe for a while it's going to help having time lapses of someone typing on their keyboard to just, ensure that you haven't kind of cheated your way to publishing a book. But again, I think given how much, and you said it yourself, how much these various programs are actually hallucinating and what sort of things they're spewing out, you can tell it as an instructor, right? And there were actually good telltale signs. If someone is using these long dashes, this is the first,
the thing is, I'm a big fan of the long dash in my actual writing.
And now we see that there's tools out there, right, that will remove them from your writing, where you feed it into the tool. At which point, I feel like we've kind of lost the plot as writers if we're actively writing something not for a machine, not for a human being, but for a human being who's going to be thinking that maybe we are a machine. Like that is thinking of the audience in such a narrow and worrisome way. The other thing with sort of the live streams and the posts and everything, it's fun and all that, but a lot of people don't even read a book. Are you going to watch one being written as well? I mean...
Yeah, as exciting as watching paint dry, but it is. I think we are now in sort of territory. This is already like, was it Christopher Nolan kind of Inception level stuff, Anyway,
Well, to the new issue of Monocle magazine, which is on a newsstand near you imminently, and herein we reveal the results of Monocle's annual Quality of Life survey. It is a bit different this year. Instead of the traditional countdown of Monocle's 20 favourite cities, we've distributed awards in various categories. Zürich, where we are standing right now, got the gong for mobility, though this visitor for one believes that the swarms of yahoos on e-scooters are too mobile by half, and Paris was adjudged the best all-round city right now. You can find all the other awards in the new issue, though listeners in Minsk probably shouldn't get their hopes up. Gorana, do we think Paris is a worthy overall winner?
Well, given that it's the location of the new Monocle Cafe, I'm sure that it has made Paris all the better for...
Well, of course it has. And while we're doing outrageous plugs, by the way, next week, the briefing and the daily will be coming out of our new Paris studio presented by Emma Nelson.
There you go.
Making Paris even better.
Yeah, exactly. Make Paris great again, as if... What I wanted to say, it's probably, just there is, I guess, the sort of positive externalities, if I can use this term, in this particular context of the Olympics last year. And I think where I heard the first round of buzz prior to the opening of the Paris Monocle Cafe is really the extent to which Paris has basically changed as a result of the Olympics. Sometimes we hear about these mega projects, as things that can also not necessarily improve the city and leave its sort of coffers depleted, but it seems that Paris has seized on this opportunity to really rebrand itself a bit. I think also the fact that they are pushing a lot more with the mayor that they have, in terms of being more green, kind of being more mobile. I think this idea of a 15-minute city, and it is, Paris is known to be kind of a city that lives within its sort of arrondissements. You're never too far away from your boulangerie and sort of from your favorite sort of places to eat and so on. So in that sense, I guess I would concur. I have nothing to say here further, differing.
Gabe, are there any other prize winners in there you would like to agree with or quibble with? And obviously, if you quibble at all, you're dead to us and we'll never invite you back.
I certainly agree with Zürich on the mobility ranking as well. As I was saying, whenever I have friends from the U.S., wherever they live in the U.S., visit and we're on the tram, the thing that they always say is, everything works. This is how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, and I wanted to, if I can interject to this,
do.
I heard from a Roman colleague. I was just in Rome for the past 3 days at a conference, and this is a person who is supposed to relocate to Zurich and came here for some job interviews and so on. And he said something to me which was really struck me. He said, the comparison, Rome, Zurich, they're incomparable, size, history, etc., etc. But one thing that he really feels, the kind of mobility part of the equation, he said, it's like playing a video game and you go from the hardest mode to the easiest. And I just said, this is exactly it, right? Like in Rome, everything is a struggle. I was like, going for a jog in the morning, it was a struggle, first of all, not to like fall into one of the potholes and dislocate my ankle. Then it was a struggle kind of with the garbage people. They're doing their thing. Tourists are there. Everyone is there. Carabinieri are escorting Guardia di Finanza. It's a mayhem, right? And then you sit in a taxi or stuck in a traffic jam and so on. So yeah, Zurich has definitely an appeal. I was very happy to be back last night, even with the delayed flight.
Well, just finally, I do want to ask you both in turn if there is one particular city, whether Monocle has awarded it with anything this year or not, that you would like to say does register quite highly on your own personal quality of life indexes. Gabe, you can go first.
There isn't one that is sticking out right at the moment, though. This is securing it. I have been thinking about a trip to Athens coming up in the fall, and after seeing Best Nightlife, I think that's going to secure it for me.
I was briefly in Athens in April. I can confirm that the outdoor dining options are plentiful and excellent. Gorana, is there a city you think has been unlucky to miss out, perhaps?
I always hear these great things about, I'm going to plug a former Yugoslav country because I'm from that part of the world, but Ljubljana is not here, and I think that there's a lot of buzz around Slovenia. It's
a lovely town.
Yeah. And I've been there, no, for sure. But I think that for a kind of country that has sort of figured this, they are sort of like a small Switzerland in a way, and really give a lot of us from the rest of that region, even though they say we are not from that region, we are Mitteleuropa through nothing to do with the Balkans. But Ljubljana is a place that I would probably nominate for a kind of city for probably livability on different kind of, from mobility to sort of safety, that green aspect would be ranking quite high. And I think that they usually do come quite high up.
Gorana Grgić and Gabe Bullard, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, our weekly letter from is back. And given that it is Swiss Week here on The Daily, we really should have commissioned a theme tune rendered in Alphorn and or yodeling. Our letter is from Wengen. Here is Monocle's Emma Nelson.
It's not easy to get to the Swiss alpine village of Wengen, and that's what makes it so special. In fact, the journey is part of the adventure. It begins at Zürich Airport for most people, where even as you descend the escalator from the passenger terminal to train, you're reminded of just how significant your destination is, far up in the Bernese Oberland. Because over several stories, from floor to ceiling, the wall is papered with a gigantic snow-capped advert for the Jungfraujoch, the highest railway station in Europe, and the backdrop for your destination. And as you venture further away from the city and more up the slopes and forests, as one traveller observed, the smaller the train, the more interesting the adventure. From Zurich you travel to Interlaken, and then the final change happens down in the Lauterbrunnen Valley, where you climb aboard a cog railway up to the mountainous village. There are a lot of discussions about that train, says Lawrence Maurer, the general manager of the Grand Hotel Belvedere, more about which in a moment. You cannot drive up to Wengen in your fancy car. There is no road. You have to leave your life, regular life, literally in the parking lot. And those 12 minutes on the cog railway are some of the most beautiful that anyone could envisage. You become, automatically, he says, a mountaineer. And this adds a peculiar quality to the quietness of the Swiss mountain village of Wengen. The 3 snowy peaks of the Jungfrau, Silberhorn and Breithorn mountains impose a giant silence on the landscape. You might hear the odd cowbell. Some birds. But what you won't hear is a motor vehicle. Wengen has a reputation for being one of the great alpine destinations. In the hotel bar, drinkers trade quotes, first from Lord Byron's Alpine Journey, where he compared the nearby 300-metre-high Staubach waterfall to the tail of a white horse streaming in the wind. Then there was J.R. Tolkien, struck by the eternal snow of the Jungfrau etched against eternal sunshine. Plus the charming claim that those self-same mountains were the backdrop for the Bond movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the one with the 007 and, I quote, "no one remembers." Poor George Lazenby. But it was around 100 years ago that Wengen first tasted fame. Driven by the British love of skiing, Wengen is the home of the first slalom ski race. It's also home to the longest downhill ski course of the Lauberhorn, and it has one of the oldest ski clubs on earth, the gloriously named Downhill Only Club. It was created a century ago, with members travelling on the same cog railway we use today to access the slopes. Hence the inspiration for the club's name. The railway did the uphill work. Its members were British skiers who wanted to race against a team from the neighbouring village and had agreed to the competition after a few drinks in a local bar. Sepia photos from the period show upright types, full of pluck, smoking a pipe. This helped to grow Wengen's reputation as one of the great skiing resorts. Its glamour peaked in the 60s with that Bond film. But then the spotlight and the money headed to the likes of Stade and St. Moritz, leaving Wengen a little less prized, but no less loved. And now the town is enjoying a renaissance. The small luxury French hotel group Baumier bought 2 adjoining Belle Epoque properties, and this summer they've opened the fully restored Grand Hotel Belvedere. Every inch of the property, except for the outside, has been rebuilt thoughtfully to create Wengen's first 5-star hotel. Lawrence Maurer knows the spotlight was trained on his project. We wanted it to happen organically, he said, reawakening the sleeping beauty. We have the best compromise without going crazy. Maurer and his team grasped the challenge of updating a place which should fit within the town. The funny part, he says, is you're in a top modern building, technically speaking, in an old shell with historic decoration. We restored it to the state it was 120 years ago. That restoration, however, was quite painful. It was supposed to last a year and a half, but it took them 3, hoisting everything from the swimming pool to the minibars up by helicopter. Remember, there are no cars here. The Grand Hotel Belvedere is indeed a wonder, but it will take a while to be fully loved. On the afternoon of my visit, 2 ladies walked up to the front door and gazed forlornly at what was done to their once favourite hotel. On their faces, that heartbreak of losing a precious place of memory-making. But without this, what would have become of Wengen? Switzerland, as you spot on the Zürich airport escalator, cherishes its mountains as its great attraction, and moving with the times is not easy. So a gentle renaissance could offer a future to this, the most eternal of locations. For Monocle, in Wengen, I'm Emma Nelson.
Thank you, Emma. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Gorana, Grgić and Gabe Bullard. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermak and Desiree Bandley here in Zurich, researched by Henry King, and our sound engineer was Flynn Simons back in London. I'm Andrew Muller here in Zurich. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.